Perfect. Great, thanks for that. Also like to start with acknowledging traditional custodians of the land on which I am. So I'd like to pay respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And yeah, I'm not sure if, do you think we should just sort of kick on, Brian? Or
I think so. Yeah, I suspect that she's given it a couple of tries that it may be a challenge. So if she is able to loop in, great. But I will send her a note that it's okay if she can't.
Okay, cool. So yeah, in the roll call, I'll put Nikki with a question mark. So yeah, I thought it would be great. Well, yeah, to give you the heads up, even since that email that we exchanged to arrange this meeting, my thinking and project has taken a whole exciting new turn. So I figured it was definitely worth still catching up. But yeah, a lot of what I'll talk about is nothing that we've talked about before. But
okay,
really excited about it. And particularly was like also really keen to hear Nikki's thought, because I'm actually after all of my dreaming and scheming at the point where I know what I want to build now, and I actually have like my first product and customer in mind. So yeah, hopefully she can tune in, but otherwise, if not, still, obviously it would be great to get your thoughts, and maybe I can connect with her later.
Right.
So I might share my screen.
Well, it had been there and then went away.
Yeah, I think I need to share this screen instead. Okay. Can you just see the slides I dragged in then?
I can see slides in regular, not in presentation mode, but I can see them just fine here.
Okay, cool. Perfect. I can't see you, but I think that's okay. So yeah, I'll start the show. Cool. Okay, so this is how this is how radically different what we'll be talking about today is. Basically, we're co-creating this new festival, which I'm thinking of as an open science festival called Open Heart and Mind. But as I hope you'll see, it's also, I think, a lot more than an open science festival, something I'm really, really excited about.
Right.
And, oh yeah, sorry for the labeling. This is for a group call that our first group call we'll have in a few hours from now. But yeah, I just threw these slides together and I thought it would make sense to run you through them as well. So a lot of this intro stuff I'll skip through real quick because obviously you're familiar with it. But the framing for me is coming from the perspective of my belief that misinformation is the biggest problem we have in the world today. Like all of the uncertainty we see around COVID, climate change, and so on, is really a fault of having incredibly biased and inefficient information systems like Google and Facebook and whatnot. And to me, the real fuel for this fire is the closed academic system. So I don't need to tell you about that. But basically, my vision for this whole thing is to try and create a sort of new internet that's based on open science principles and potentially has like metrics that we could use to investigate or sort of make transparent the reliability of news articles and so forth that we might read. So I've blogged about this. I think I've sent this to you before, so this might just be a reminder. But basically what I'm imagining for this sort of internet-based system would be multiple layers of information that would all be interrelated and fully open. The base layer would be open access. So this is access to the research itself. Then the second layer would be the peer review, open peer review layer. But in my vision, I like this idea of numerical ratings on a number of dimensions like reliability, transparency, and so forth. And then in my model, also on top of the reviews, there has to be some kind of a sort of quality control measure of the reviews, which I guess normally would be performed by an editor. And so in my model, the sort of editorial role shifts to a kind of meta review role where reviews themselves can be rated and provided with constructive feedback to improve them for the next time. And then finally, the sort of sum of all of these different metrics could go into some kind of a reputation score for the experts and the reviewers themselves. Something is similar to what we already see on Stack Exchange and other platforms like that. And so I believe this could be really valuable because if all of this information were made available to the public, then people could satisfy their natural curiosity to understand things. And when they're faced with, some uncertainty around COVID or climate change or whatever, they could start to tap into the underlying information sources on any two articles or new media articles they might read and start to question those sources that are actually quite unreliable and not in line with the science. And by the way, yeah, just feel free to jump in and stop at any point if what I'm saying is not clear, because I literally have just made these slides a few hours ago.
Great.
And haven't practiced them, so
yeah. Oh, good. Well, it's the dry run. This is great.
Yes, the dry run. Yeah, and so this is the sort of end goal I'm working towards. I've been thinking, obviously, a lot about how we can get researchers to buy into this model, and until recently, my best idea for that was to create this kind of new journal model that I've pitched to you before, and we've talked about a lot. And basically, that idea would be to build a sort of researcher-controlled equivalent to the journal hierarchy that we see in the commercial publishing system, but something that makes all of those sort of information layers openly available so that we can start to explore that data, but also build algorithms that can pick the sort of high-quality research out of all of the noise that we see right now, all of the millions of preprints that get published every week or whatever it might be. And the key thing with this model is that by using these algorithms and ratings to categorize articles into different tiers of quality and then publishing those tiers separately, I think we could start to generate a mechanism that generates prestige at the journal level, but not with the goal of just replicating the commercial system. The goal here would be to start to build that rich data set of what the community thinks about research. And then we could start to use that in all kinds of powerful ways. Like we could, start to explore and understand bias through meta research. We could start to build algorithms to predict outcomes of interest like reliability or replicability. And then we could lease the outputs of that data set and algorithms to various sectors of society, like businesses that might be interested in the reliability of research, like pharmaceutical companies, everything from that to governments, funders, universities, basically you name it. Because the way I see it, what we do is incredibly valuable. We are just failing to capture that value right now, and we instead donate it to commercial publishers. So yeah, this is kind of this is where I was at when we last talked, I guess. And I was happily sort of posting my blogs about this idea, and in the last 2 months, basically, I've pivoted in an entirely new direction. And what caused me to get there was sort of thinking through this problem of like, it's all well and good to develop this journal model, but at the end of the day, that doesn't actually solve the problem that we're really interested in, which is how to value all of the non-article outputs that are currently ignored, like the data, the code, the random contributions to open science projects. And so I've been thinking about this for quite a while. Like, what would be really useful is if we had some kind of a independent mechanism where we could track value and potentially reward all of the various tasks that someone might contribute to the scientific enterprise. And so, for example, like in an open science project, there's lots of tasks that get done, and people typically, have these tasks completed on any number of different platforms like Google Docs, GitHub, Asana, or Trello. But the first problem is that all of the activity tends to be distributed across multiple platforms. So this makes it quite difficult to actually track what's going on. And then secondly, there's no real clear way to sort of get a community estimation of the relative value of all of these different tasks. And the closest, I guess, sort of approximation to that ideal that I've seen is in GitHub, typically, which does let you track commits. But the problem with that is that commits don't speak to the relative value of what was actually done. And so, one commit might represent 6 months of work, whereas another commit might represent 6 seconds. And they're sort of, within it, GitHub at least, they're sort of equally valued. There's a number of solutions that I think are a bit hacky at this point to this problem. So the sort of most advanced method I know for recognizing contributions in the open science space is adopted by the Open Life Science Program and also the Turing Way. And they use a GitHub bot called the All Contributors bot, which basically lets you, the kind of output is basically a table in your README or somewhere that lists everybody who's contributed and then gives everybody a single badge. And so it might be, like a content badge, or it might be a coding badge, or whatever. Like there's all these different, there's this taxonomy of different badges that people can get. And obviously I think that's a good thing. I think it's a great step towards providing recognition of those people who contribute. But I still think it's imperfect in the sense that once you've got a badge, there's no real further incentive for you to keep doing more work. And so similar to the problem before, like you might get a content badge for, half a day's work or something like that. And then, but someone else might get a content badge for half a day's work and then go on to do another year's work. And they still end up with just the same level of recognition. And to me, I see that as a barrier to effective collaboration, because the latter person might question, well, why should I put time into this if I'm not actually going to get the reward I deserve? And also it kind of creates this, I guess, opaqueness and barrier to, it's a trust problem really, because a contributor has to trust that the open science, the project leader is actually going to fairly attribute value to them. They're going to, give them proper recognition in papers and whatever other outputs that might come from the project. And so without having all of that stated up front, it really requires a big part of trust on the contributor. Whereas if there was a sort of pre-established framework or agreement about how different contributions could be valued, then I think that negates a lot of the trust problem and means that people could actually start to just jump on in and really start collaborating effectively. And so I think I started thinking about this as sort of the open science movement, particularly because I had a chat with a group at Research Hub who are doing like really interesting things in the sort of crypto space, and that's the direction I want to go. And I realized that like my ideas for sort of trying to incentivize contributions could mesh with theirs potentially if we could sort of solve this like trust problem. Like, what does the project get called? Do I still get credit? Are they still the founders, or do I get some kind of credit down the track for whatever value I might add? And so that's how I started thinking about this. But I've since realized that this is actually a very generic problem that basically every single organization in the world has. And what it's kind of speaking to is a sort of, I guess, contrast at the moment between top-down and bottom-up management styles. And because the sort of, sorry, I'm going way off slides here. But just let me know if it's not making sense. But the traditional way to manage a project is very top-down, so it's very hierarchical. But obviously, this is inefficient for a number of reasons. Chief among them, there's bottlenecks at every step of the way, and so there's only so much that a manager can actually, observe and also fairly reward in their, group of employees. And the flip side to this then is a sort of bottom-up organization style, which is pretty much what the Turing Way and lots of open science projects are trying to do. But at the same time, this bottom-up approach, which might be better at capturing the sort of value of contributions to the crowd, has limitations in the sense that if it's a purely bottom-up approach, then it can lack direction and the clarity of control that you do get from a hierarchical organization, and is actually, really valuable to have those people that know what they're doing and intimately involved with the project directing things. And so what I've realized that we're creating here is a kind of merging between top-down and bottom-up management styles with this new product, which I think I may have just sort of, I don't know if I've gone way too off track, but I think I'll just jump into what the new concept is now.
Yeah.
and all of this actually, yeah. So the second point on this slide is to say that what I feel like there's too much, like science is a pressure cooker, you know, like there's so much competition. Everybody's so tense because everything rides on metrics, everything rides on papers, and there's just very little like room or flexibility or space to move and test ideas out. And so what I think could be actually useful is like taking these concepts, but prototyping them and developing them outside academia so that we can generate some data and then start to show researchers, go, hey, look, we're doing it over here. It works like this. We've demonstrated the proof of concept. And then now maybe we can sort of start to bring it into the academic sphere. And so without further ado, the space that I think we could do this is in the festival space. And this is partly because this is basically merging my two great loves in my life, which is open science and dancing, which is something that really actually coming out of my PhD, which I faced a really serious depression, dancing and also a lot of the really nourishing well-being practices that I've picked up through festivals and developed has been a really big part of my recovery, and getting to a point where I'm able to contribute effectively to society again. And so I, on a personal level, feel like, well, this is just a perfect meshing of my two interests. But I also feel that the worlds of science and spirituality actually have a lot to learn from each other. And at least that's in my life, that's been my experience. And so bringing those two worlds together, I think gives us an opportunity to learn about practices that we might not be exposed to within our regular bubble, and also gives us an opportunity to bring together different communities. Because what I actually see by straddling these sort of two different communities of science and spirituality is that we all have the same desires and motivations in mind, right? Like we all want to create a better world, or generally most of us want to create a better world that minimizes suffering for all beings on this planet. But what I see at the same time is there's like a dearth of information between these two communities. And particularly with COVID, I've had some really interesting conversations where I'm just like, wow, where are you getting your information from? Because it's such a different story to what I'm hearing. And so I feel like that really is just a matter of conversation. And it's a matter of creating spaces where we can start to have these conversations in a non-judgmental and loving, joyful setting, so that we take a bit of the pressure off the situation and just start to connect as humans, as we deal with these really difficult, uncertain questions of the times. And so that's the sort of main, I guess, initial aim of the festival, and that was the initial motivation when I came up with it. But I've since realized that also this festival is the perfect opportunity to test a lot of these ideas that I've been dreaming up for academia in a really safe space where, there's nothing riding for anyone. It's a totally new festival we're creating. And so we don't need to sort of worry about destroying someone's career and so forth. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so that's the kind of sort of aim for the festival. There's various principles and values that I'm basing it on. So the first is Burning Man, which is basically a gift-based economy, along with 9 other principles that they adopt. But I feel like this sort of removing the transactional component to a festival creates a really creative, energetic space where people are sort of free to co-create, and I feel like it creates generates a really creative atmosphere. Obviously open science principles, but the way I'm seeing this working is obviously in the principles themselves, but also in the way open science conferences are run, typically with hackathons and lightning talks and those sorts of things. And then the other set of values is what Brene Brown calls wholehearted living, which is another set of 10 principles that I've found really beneficial, and actually was the sort of first book really that I read that started my journey out of depression and started helping me take better care of myself so that I could recover. So those are the sort of values from the outset that I'm yet to coalesce into a single vision, but just to sort of give a bit of a framework. And then this here is sort of this is talking more about the process and tool that I want to build with this festival. And the goal of this really is to create what I'm thinking of as an open source festival management tool. And so at the same time, we'll be using this and prototyping it with the Open Heart and Mind Festival, which, by the way, shortens to the most amazing acronym OM. I love it for that.
It is pretty nicely done, yeah.
It was so serendipitous how that came together too, and I was so happy. And then when I realized that OM spans both like sort of, you know, spiritual contexts as well as scientific contexts in the sense of, you know, unit of resistance, then I was like, oh, yep, that's it. But yeah, so yeah, like this template will be used to organize and run the festival itself. But it's also a template that is capable of, or a tool, I guess, that's capable of keeping track of all of the contributions to the project in the form of individual tasks. And then also alongside that, this is the really novel part, is developing this sort of community-based process for valuing different contributions. So I'll go into that in a little bit. But yeah, the cool thing is I've realized that this is actually like a potentially like a financially viable product. And I think even potentially within a year, I think we could start to generate some returns from festivals. And I've got a couple that are like really aligned with our mission in mind already. And so I think like my next step is to approach them and see if they're interested in collaborating to develop this platform. And the goal would be to then get it to a point where we can start to lease it to festivals, but even potentially beyond festivals to potentially any organization that wants to optimize their management style and bring in this kind of blend between top-down and bottom-up management. So I don't know if I've kind of, yeah, I guess you'll jump in with any questions. This is the progress to date. This all kind of accelerated rapidly because I'd already decided to have a birthday festival for my 40th back in November. And so we used this as a sort of pilot test basically for this concept. So I gave a talk, we had a few workshops that people proposed. We had the usual smattering of dancing and good times at a festival. But following that festival, and so we had around, I think 130 people over the weekend join us for that. And I outlined my vision and got really good feedback, like lots of people are really excited about it and keen to contribute. And so out of that then, like following the birthday festival, we created this survey, which basically was designed to seek feedback on which contributions to the festival people valued the most. And the way we did this was basically just give everybody who came a pool of gratitude tokens and ask them to just distribute them in any way they feel to amongst all of the contributions that went into the weekend. So there was something like 57 contributions, and people could allocate however many tokens to each contribution. We also did an A/B test, primarily just to sort of like demonstrate and test this idea of conducting meta research on the system itself. And so the second condition we included didn't list all of the contributions. So basically it was just a free form response where someone could type in their own contributions. And we have some pretty sort of, I guess, low hanging hypotheses here. I think that, you know, when you don't give people a list of contributions, they're not going to list as many contributions. They're not going to do as complete a job. But also potentially they're going to be a bit more free and creative in their responses. And so we're also expecting there to be more contributions that we haven't thought of basically in this free form response. Mm-hmm. And so that's sort of just going to be testing the basic assumption that providing a list of contributions a priori constrains the responses that people give basically. And so, yeah, I don't have all the results in, but you know, from the sort of 20 surveys that we've got so far, it definitely looks like that's holding up. To be confirmed though. And so, there's a task list. Yes, and so the other thing is that when I organized Koopa-Palooza, I basically did it within this application called ClickUp, which you can kind of think of. Are you familiar with this?
No, the first time I've seen it was your agenda.
Yeah, it's really exciting. Have you heard of Notion?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So it's basically like Notion. It's very, very similar, except that it's a bit more rigid in its structure, and it's rigid in the sense that everything is based on a task or a document. And so basically what it means is that it's kind of a bit more geared towards something like Trello or Asana, where you've got all of these tasks, but at the same time, you can have documents within there. It's all tracked on Git. And then also what I really like about it is that it's got a chat feature, which like I haven't used Slack properly for a very long time because I've just got overwhelmed with the almost 20 workspaces that I have going in there.
Yeah.
And I also just find it like really annoying that like those are like 20 open science related workspaces, but I can't tag someone across a workspace, like if you're not in, workspace A, I can't just go, oh, Brian, this is a really relevant conversation to such and such. And so I feel like for a while, like I've been thinking, God, it'd be so much nicer if we had a kind of like open science-based communication tool, something that had like a sort of upper hierarchy that meant people could sort of tag across projects and start to collaborate more effectively. And I've realized that ClickUp has the sort of workings, the beginnings of this kind of dream that I've had for a bit now. It's, to be upfront, the chat function is not very good right now. But I think it's still a sort of window into potentially what we could do in a future product that we might build. And so within ClickUp, I've started typing up the open source documentation for this project, and also started allocating tasks to people that are jumping onto the project, and then also just keeping track of my own organization, which is how this all began. And I actually just found it to be such a win for my productivity. That even on that front, I think just using something like ClickUp or Notion is just really beneficial to researchers, a lot of whom aren't using these sorts of tools yet.
Yeah.
And so this is the roadmap. So basically, we've just booked in the same beautiful site for the end of March for our first official festival, and so that's what we're heading towards. In the meantime, so you can think of the survey that we ran after Koopa-Palooza as the sort of first pilot test into evaluation process. The second pilot test that we're going to be running is through the application process. So OM is going to be a bit unique in the sense that it's going to be completely by donation. And so I'll be covering any gaps in the funding or anything like that, just to make sure it definitely goes ahead. But people will have an opportunity to apply, and in their application, they can state all of the ways that they want to contribute, which may or may not include money, if money is something that they have. Otherwise, they can offer workshops, talks, you name it, basically. And so the idea here is then that all of these applications will be made openly available, and we'll go through a review process that will be a kind of a value assigning process, where experts and just the broader community generally will have an opportunity to sort of vote for the offerings and workshops and so forth that they want to see at the festival. And this is the sort of, second test of the idea of how we can try to create a sort of community-based valuation process. And so that will be feeding into the ON Festival 1, and then obviously we'll have some data that we can look into and try and understand what's going on and make it better for the next one. And so the next one actually, like I'm planning already for, I haven't started planning, but intending to do again at the end of this year. So I'm thinking of this as like an agile process as much as possible. Like I want to get to the point where we're doing 4 festivals a year, like one with each season. But in the meantime, I think 2 a year is perfectly manageable, given how quickly we could pull together Koopa-Palooza. And potentially, because this like template is making things so efficient, I think potentially we could even do a 3rd one this year, but I'm just going to play that by ear. And so that's on the festival side of things. But then there's also this system that we're developing in the background. And so what that is looking like in terms of milestones is right now we're prototyping this product, and we're doing that in ClickUp and Google Sheets. So Google Sheets really is the process that is how we're trying to capture the sort of value using these gratitude tokens. And that's like obviously super clunky, but it's doing the job that we need it to. And then once we've prototyped and demonstrate the concept, then we'll be moving to building a custom app. And this is something that will plug into the ClickUp API. And so we'll make things a whole lot easier, because then we can just get people to sort of vote via this app for tasks that we've already identified in ClickUp. Yeah, and so that I'm really excited about getting to that stage, because this prototyping stage is painful. And then a future stage, like once that's developed, and possibly alongside the app, I haven't figured this out yet, but at some point I want to move to building an actual, not necessarily a blockchain, because there's lots of blockchains that we can use, like Ethereum and so forth, but building a token, a non-fungible token on one of these different blockchains, which basically, like these NFTs, could be tied to the data and contributions that people add, so that that becomes a lasting record of what they've done, and also could potentially be an avenue through which we can reward people directly if and when money starts coming into this system. And I think we have talked about this sort of concept before. Like my vision here is to develop a smart contract that, based on this set of rules that we're developing as we go, could automatically allocate some portion of money that comes into the system, could be allocated according to this rule set that's written into the smart contract itself. And then that just automatically distributes money to everybody who has created the value in the first place. And I don't know if this is really a milestone, but my vision for this product is to expand to other markets once we've demonstrated the concept in the festival space. And obviously I'm interested in moving into open science. That's the whole dream. But I've realized as well, there's like a potentially, I think I'll talk about this on another slide. Oh yeah, I do, okay. So yeah, like I'm interested in also, I think a really big market could be distributed autonomous organizations, because basically I feel like this sort of decentralized management template that we're building is perfect for optimizing the way that those organizations move forward. And how they, I guess, make sure that the right people are driving the organization, as opposed to sort of one member, one vote system, which is highly inefficient. And so, yeah, this is the business model that I feel could be quite viable. So the basic idea would be to charge organizations that want to use our platform a fee that depends on how well they align with our mission. So on one end of the extreme, you've got, open science projects like Center for Open Science. Like we're, I think, perfectly aligned in our mission. And so there would be no fee involved. And in fact, we could potentially just start to, use the same mechanisms and platforms and learn from one another and effectively merge and become stronger together. But then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got, for-profit companies, even not-for-profit companies that maybe aren't fully aligned with our mission. The idea there would be that when these organizations decide they want to use our platform, we, the community, rate them on a number of metrics that make sense to us, like perhaps, alignment with our mission and roadmap, whether they're transparent, whether they follow science, and so forth. And this then gets converted into a fee using a pretty basic algorithm that basically charges, like less aligned companies more money than more aligned companies, like not-for-profits and so forth. But also the other cool thing, I think, is that it gives those projects or organizations a clear pathway to reducing their fees. Yeah. So let's say we evaluate Greenpeace by saying, yeah, you're pretty good. Like we like your mission, it aligns with ours, but you don't follow the latest science because you're still arguing against GMOs, and you're still, not advocating for reducing meat and so forth. Like there could be a number of factors that we identify through this process that gives them an opportunity to go, okay, here's how we're failing. And actually we could like completely remove all these costs if we just get a bit better at these elements. And so I think it could potentially like provide this kind of natural funnel towards organizations getting on board with our mission and our set of principles, or alternatively, they pay us a bunch of money and then gets fed into the more aligned missions. And so I kind of feel like it's sort of a win-win having this kind of like tiered subscription.
Values aligned. That's very nice.
Yeah. So yeah, I feel like it could be really good for sort of fostering collaboration and yeah, getting projects to put aside their differences and actually starting to merge and collaborate more effectively. So yeah, this is where it's at. I've taken on a research assistant who I'm working on this full time now. I quit my job and I'm just basically using my poker savings and crypto gamblings, I guess you could call them, to support this project. And so out of that, I've started employing a research assistant. But basically already like I said, like in a few hours, we've got our first meeting and there's something like 10 people turning up and there's already like 200 people in the Facebook group. And so I think this is actually accelerating quite quick and I think it's going to get a lot of traction. And so the point here this is a standard slide I pulled from a startup deck, but basically the point I was making here is that really like the team is anyone who feels they can add value to the project and actually does so, because like I'm not really seeing this as a sort of top-down thing. I'm seeing it as if someone can add value and they can, if they want to take this prototype and bring it to a whole new market, then go for it. Like that's going to be a win for both of us. And then that'll be recognized, in the long term that you opened up an entire new market with this product. And so therefore you get some kind of reward for that. And that empowers you to then go on and do other awesome things in the future. And so really, I feel like this could be open to researchers, open science project leads, developers, which right now I feel like probably the next person I really do need is like a dedicated developer. But yeah, organizational psychologists, people that just want to do sort of menial tasks, really just anyone, anyone I feel like could jump on, and the whole process is to develop a mechanism to make that work effectively. So yeah, this is kind of my pitch for the people later, but we've got a Facebook group, which, I added you on Facebook. I think I may have invited you to this already, but.
Oh, okay, great, I'll take a look.
Actually, no, I tried to, and they've put a limit on how many people I can invite. So I can shoot you a personal message and then with the link. Sure. But that's basically at this stage, because the chat function within ClickUp isn't very good. That's where we're doing most of the sort of discussion and just sort of general chat about the project. But then the back end and the real powerhouse of it is on this ClickUp workspace. And so I've created an application form for people to register and join the space. And it basically just asks them to accept that their contributions will be made open. And also, I wanted to ask you about this. Like, I would love to build in some kind of at this stage, quite a brief, like cognitive bias training tool or like course, maybe something an hour or two, just because like we're moving quickly and like obviously it'd be better longer, but I think at this stage, maybe an hour would be enough just to sort of get people thinking about cognitive bias, because at some point we're going to be reviewing applications, and it would be good if those people who don't have a psychology background were up to speed a bit on the biases they might be bringing to the table. So that was one question I had for you as to whether you know of anything, and particularly something that would be like geared towards online interaction, because that's really what a lot of what we'll be doing is like sort of online reviews and that sort of thing. Does that ring any bells for you?
Well, on that latter part, there isn't good evidence that just getting educated about cognitive bias reduces any biases, and we've studied some. So that may not be the most useful path, but there are some paths of, remind me, I can send you a paper that Jordan Axt and I did recently, where we found it's small effects, but even just simple direct reminders of the categories of potential bias, saying,
oh yeah,
be careful about gender here, was effective at reducing bias in that domain. What's interesting is very general messages like be careful about bias or here's all the infinite numbers of groups you might be biased against, were not effective. So it was really actually highlighting the group that's the potential source of bias, or maybe a couple of groups that was needed so that people could employ whatever corrective strategies that they would employ.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you, Brian. I knew you'd be the perfect person to ask about that. Yeah, that would be great if if you could follow up with the I'll remind you via email, but yeah, it'd be great if you had a link to that paper.
Yeah, I'm sure. In fact, I might be able to pull it up while we're talking.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you. Yeah, so and this is something that I guess we can develop over time. You know, like I imagine I've got a friend actually who's joining the call later who is. Oh, we don't have long. This is too much of a tangent. Anyway, this is something that we can develop over time.
I found it. The link in the chat is the paper.
Oh, amazing. I can't see the chat now, but I'll tune into that at the end. And yeah. So yeah, I guess the last point on this is that people are free to contribute in whatever way they like. And also my point for the group later is to basically say that I have money for this, like it's my own money, but I'm more than happy to pour this into this project and get it to the point where it's financially viable, because I think it's going to be financially viable and it's just a matter of time. And so I'm acting as my own sort of angel investor, I guess, for this project, which is great because I'm not constrained by any profit motives or, you know, anything like that. And so basically if there's contributions that people feel like they have skills that could be particularly relevant and valuable to this project, then I have some money to pay those people. So that's just an open invitation to anyone who might be looking at this presentation to get in touch and let's chat. And so yeah, that's it. That's my very ad hoc presentation. Thanks for listening, Brian.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks for the overview. It was interesting to see the path of how your thinking is evolving with this direction. It's very interesting.
Thank you.
Just some very big picture reactions. I very much like how this has gotten grounded in an identified problem that an incremental step can help to address. Right? I think a lot of our prior conversations have been way up at the vision phase, which I think we are very aligned on what we would like to see happen in those. But when we're up there, it's really hard to ground it into, okay, what's a realistic step where if we took it, we could then build on that and then build on that and build on that. And that's always the hard problem, right? To get from here to there. But this feels to me like you have a clear step that has the right place to start, a great test bed to work from, and then potential paths to making it, and multiple paths, not even a single one. Like Alex Holcomb, you may have talked to Alex Holcomb some about this already, but you know he is really interested in credit allocation in research, and advocate for that. Has his own little app for who did what for the credit system. It's really easy to see how that could connect with what you're doing here. That provides more than just who did what, but how much value did we collectively get from those contributions. So
yes, absolutely.
And then the other part that resonates a lot with what you described is project management, task management. There's plenty of apps, right? There's so many different solutions, and they all have their strengths and weaknesses. But none that I've seen do a whole lot of exactly the part that you're trying to solve for, which is, yeah, you did the task. How valuable was that? What did I get from that, right? And the way that they're documented, some of these systems are, you know, by size or by amount, but not by value in a more psychological, perhaps, way of representing the value. So that I think is promising. I think you're right. That is a general problem, not a specific one. So all of that to me seems like, okay, yeah, I can see a path here of what your logic is and where you're headed and how to get there. And I think it also tackles a piece of the open science challenge in a way that is constructive and could plug in without having to try to reinvent lots of other systems and tools, right? So the what you described as your app, you could easily imagine plugging that into OSF, and then in a given project, allocate contribution to the various members of the project, right? Or you have the entire history of the log entries of that project, and you could be allocating by those log entries rather than by the people, or both. You know, there's lots. It's just, it is pulling in a list and providing a mechanism for allocating contribution, some kind of reward, is a good thing to try to solve. And so and I think what you've laid out some reasonable next steps on where it is you can test it and start to get feedback on system-wise and use-wise. How would one be able to do that and interact with it? I'll be curious once you really get into it, if you can stay general enough that it does be extendable to other domains. I think that's a real challenge. Once you're building an app for a festival, you're building an app for festivals. And it can become hard to sort of manage what are the general principles I'm trying to extract versus what are the things that are really bespoke to this particular community or task or whatever. And so that's an unknown. I mean, that's just, you have to jump in and do stuff to get there. And what often will happen, and we've confronted this with our own infrastructure, is that's when refactoring becomes relevant, right? You build, you're a year and a half in, and you're like, oh my gosh, we totally constrained ourselves without realizing it. We now know what the general principles are, but we can't apply them over there and over here until we redesign our system. So obviously the mechanisms to fight, that ends up just being technical debt, right? The mechanisms for fighting that are, using good modularity so that things are excisable and reinsertable to the extent possible, to really be interactive with that prototyping and constantly looking to another community, prototyping at the same time, right? So you get to version 1 with the festival community, that's the time to prototype with the open science community. Am I going off in a weird direction here? Or does this still apply? So you have those conversations still shaping vision for the direction it goes. But yeah, so those are just some very general big picture reactions, but I like where you're at.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's how I was imagining it is. I mean, to be honest, I think sooner the better. I can get like open science projects to start playing with these ideas and prototyping. But at this stage, the only projects that I've managed to convince are my projects. Not surprising.
Right, and that, so that's where it starts. Right.
It's also fine. Like, there's enough sort of tasks and stuff in there that I can start to play with it. I just don't have a lot of people contributing to my projects until this one. But so this one has more than enough people now. So I think it's sort of,
right.
I think you're right. Version 1 will be the perfect time to potentially, like Center for Open Science or another organization, we could start seeing how it transfers. But on that note, like this is something that I'm constantly thinking about is, okay, make sure this is still transferable to the science space, but it ends up being quite transferable because at the end of the day, what you've got is a bunch of contributions. And so in the festival space, they might be a workshop, it might be, you might build a thing, but in the science space, it's some data, it's an article, it's a whatever. But those contributions at the end of the day are just tasks. Yeah. And so like that's always transferable.
Right. Yeah, that core it is. I think the challenge will be is interface, is how is it that people engage with making those ratings. Eventually, you kind of have to be responsive to the user of where they are in their reality. Well, I need to be able to do this on my phone out in the field. Okay, well, we'll do that. All right. Well, wait a second. That doesn't quite apply. Whatever it ends up being,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So yeah, and that's really, I've already written up refactoring, and I need to get my head around what that is. So that's useful advice from your perspective. The other thing as well, though, is, oh no, I lost it. Oh yeah. So like what I think we're building here, more than just the product itself, which, as you say, these are sort of just technical challenges like refactoring and modularity and so forth. But more than what we're building there is the process. Like, I think that's the really valuable thing that we're creating, because ultimately, like, any Google could come along and go, oh yeah, actually what they're doing is really great. Like, let's just copy that and recreate it.
Sorry, I don't understand.
But because
Can
they're
you
not,
rephrase?
because they're, Google's answering me because I talked about
He
Google.
said, "Hey Google." Yeah.
Shush.
They've been listening the whole time.
The whole time. They know what we're up to. Damn it. But yeah, that's the thing. Like, they could replicate what we're doing, because it's all gonna be open source. So someone could just copy it, but they don't have the community. They don't have a community of researchers, meta researchers, and the process that we're learning over time about how to evolve the organization and make sure you're keeping in line with scientific principles and doing things optimally. And so that's what I think is the real value that we'll be providing, and something that will always be valuable to any company, Googles and so forth of the world, because it's not something that they can do. They're not researchers. They don't have this budget to pour time and skills and money and whatnot into that. And so I feel like that's the sort of real selling point for this. And that, I think, is what, even if we were to make everything fully open source, like, and I have some ideas there about, like, at what level do we make things open? Maybe there's some level where we can sort of hide some level of granularity, I guess, of the data, where it's like, there might be a freemium service where everybody gets the sort of surface level, but, for organizations that want to dive in deeper, maybe they pay some sort of subscription fee. But then another way we could do it is just through services, which I've heard a lot of open source organizations run entirely on support services. So we would lease our expertise on how to optimize this system to organizations that want to pay for it. And that money then just gets fed back into the community. So yeah, that was kind of something that I just thought of when you're talking about making sure it's transferable. I think that process is always going to be transferable, because that's they're lessons that we're learning as we go.
Yeah, great.
Totally.
Yeah, right.
But I'm learning a lot already, and I think it's only going to keep getting more refined and closer to the approximation of the ideal. And a really key point here is, as long as we let go of the idea of creating something perfect, like, this is also something that I encounter a lot when I pitch my ideas to researchers, is we're so trained to be skeptical and so trained to be, like, hyper perfectionistic that you propose a system that's clearly better than what we have, and people just focus on the negative. They're like, oh yeah, but it's not going to be perfect. And we have to let go of that. Like, we have to let go of this idea of perfection. And in fact, that book by Brené Brown I mentioned is actually called The Gifts of Imperfection. And so it's quite apt, I think. But, like, if we can let go of that idea of that we're going to create the perfect system, then we can accept the fact that it's going to get better over time, and it will start to approximate the perfect system. But let's just forget the idea it's ever going to be perfect.
Right.
It's going to have to evolve.
You'll never get started if you have to be perfect.
Yeah. Yes, yeah, get started. Yeah. And people are going to try and game it. Yes, they're going to, this is the first response. But what about gaming? We already have gaming, firstly. Secondly, we can respond to gaming. We will have data, we will have algorithms, we will have processes. We can, respond as necessary when these problems arise. But those are real fringe problems, I think, as this thing evolves. And it's just something that we will respond to in a dynamic.
What a great problem to have, that people care about this so much that they try to game it, right? We want people to be gaming it. That's a milestone of achievement.
Yes, that's a great way to frame it. Yes, I love that. It's a great problem to have.
Yeah, we are besought with spam, and it's like a great demonstration. Our website has such good SEO that spammers are constantly trying to get their stuff on OSF now. So great. It's a pain in the neck. We hate it, but we are so glad that we've achieved it.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
On the span. I love it. That's great. Well, I'm conscious of time, Brian. I see that it's gone the hour, so it's up to you, really. If you.
Yeah, I do have to move on now. It's getting dark, and the kids are waiting for whatever it is they're waiting for me to do. But do let me know how it goes with the group, and then keep me in the loop on your progress, and be pleased to check in when it's the right time to do so.
Can I actually ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
So like one thing on that, like keeping people up to date, like I've been wondering about a mailing list, which I haven't set up yet because this is all happening so quickly. But the thing is, like, I'm so much more excited about this new idea that I'm not putting as much time into Free Our Knowledge and the sort of publishing model. But at the same time, I've got this, like, you know, pretty good mailing list, maybe like 600 people on Free Our Knowledge who signed up for that project, which is a collective action problem. But I guess in some respects, they also signed up to me and whatever I'm doing. And so I'm kind of at this point of like, do I start a new mailing list for this new project and let them be separate? Or do I just co-opt that mailing list? Yeah. And I'm kind of inclined to co-opt purely because I feel like a lot of people will be interested anyway. People that aren't interested can just unsubscribe if they like. But if I feel like it's kind of like sort of way to just accelerate the mailing list for this new project. What do you think?
Yeah, it is not without risk. So it's a good one to think through. I think it's possible if you have a transition email that's it's posted to the list that's short enough but specific, saying this is the Free Your Knowledge list. Here's this new thing. I'm sort of expanding the scope of what we're working on. This is what I'm going to be posting on a lot over the next year, and then make the unsubscribe really prominent. If you don't want to be bothered by this is the time to unsubscribe. Here it is, one click. And that I think would be that responsive way of, I recognize this is moving this direction, want to call it out. And then those that stay on won't feel like you've pulled the wool over their eyes.
Yeah, no, that's a really good idea. You prompted another thought that actually, like, I've already started setting up some sort of checkboxes for things that people want to hear about. So within the context of Free Our Knowledge, that was, you know, what's your field? What's your open science interest? You know, is it data? Is it access? And so forth. And so now I'm wondering, actually, maybe I could create a checklist that's like, tell me the projects you want to hear about. Like, do you want to hear about, if you only want to hear about Free Our Knowledge, then that's fine. Just, you know, you can unsubscribe. And so maybe that's the email. It's like, here's what I'm doing, here's where I'm at, and here's the link where you can not automatically subscribe to this new. But I think, yeah, I need to look into European data laws as to whether it's okay to just add people. I mean, it's still.
Yeah, that gets tricky. Yeah. Yeah, I think the easier one is expanding the scope of what your Free Your Knowledge concept is. Right. Is broadening the.
Which I'm happy. Yeah, I'm happy to do. I mean, I love the name still. Like, I think it's still very relevant. I think it still is what this project is trying to do. So, I just wasn't sure if it made sense to like keep that as its own thing and then start this new thing over here.
Yeah, then you have multiple to manage, and then that's because.
Yeah, I don't have time for that.
Right.
Unless I employ someone to start looking after FOC.
Right.
I'm not going to have much time to put into it. Whereas this is a way to actually at least stay in touch with the community but without adding to my workload. So I think that's a great idea. I'll do a transition email and give everyone an option to unsubscribe. Thank you.
Okay. Very good. All right. Well, it was great to catch up with you. Thanks for making time.
You too, Brian. Thank you. I really appreciated your listening to my crazy ramblings over the last few years, and so thank you for all of the advice and everything that you've helped me with.
Of course. Yeah. Happy to be having chats with people who are wrestling with these same problems. So I enjoy it.
Wrestle we will.
All right. Very good.
Thanks,
all right,
Brian. Well. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Have a great day or night. See you.
Yeah.